Once upon a time, that Daddy was driving the car when suddenly Daddy felt very ill. "Oh no," said Daddy, "you've got to drive me to the hospital," to his little boy. And the little boy said, "I don't know how to drive, Daddy." And Daddy said, "But you've got to drive. You've got to drive me to the hospital quickly." So the little boy jumped into the front seat and put his foot down on the accelerator, and the car went careening down the road, left and right, bumping the other cars, bump, 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 and all the drivers were getting angry. Then he drove off the edge of the road and into a river, and he drove along the edge of the river, in the middle of the river, splash, 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 all the ducks were getting out of the way, and the fish were jumping out of the river almost. And then he came to a hill, and he drove up the hill in the car, and he drove so fast up the hill, little boy, because he didn't know where the brakes were. He went off the top of the hill and flew through the air and landed down on the other side, on another hill, and then he went very, very fast, and then suddenly he was on the motorway again, and a police car saw him and thought he was going too fast, so the police car started to chase him. Da-doo, 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 da-doo. But the little boy knew he had to get his daddy to hospital, so he put his foot down, he put his foot on the accelerator and floored it. That means he pushed the accelerator right to the floor to go as fast as possible. The police couldn't catch him, and then he swerved round the corner with the squealing of brakes and wheels. The brakes were squealing, the wheels were squealing on the road. It was very noisy. I burned my finger on unplugging the electric fire there. Then the little boy saw the sign for the hospital ahead, so he drove down the road, bumping more cars, hit a couple of trees, knocked them over, hit a lamppost, and the lamppost fell over, bumped into the traffic lights, and the traffic lights fell to the ground, but he drove over the top of them, smashing them to bits, and finally got into the hospital car park, parked in front of the hospital, and called the nurses. "Come quick, my daddy needs help." So the nurses came with a stretcher and put Daddy on the stretcher, and Daddy and the little boy all rushed into the hospital. And inside the hospital, the Daddy was examined by the doctors with his stethoscope, and he tapped the Daddy in different places. "Does this hurt? Does this hurt? How do you feel there?" And finally, the doctor found the problem. Daddy had an appendicitis. That's when you've got something goes bad in your tummy.
Where is it?
It's about there.
Where is it hurting?
Just here, on my side, above my hip, on my right hip. And the doctor said, "Oh dear, 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 you've got an appendicitis. We're going to have to take it out." So the little boy had to wait in the waiting room while Daddy went into surgery. And in the surgery, I won't tell you what happened, but they basically cut you open, take the bad appendix out, and sew you up again. And Daddy came out with a big...
What's so?
What? What's what?
Daddy, Daddy, didn't we hurt?
No, because when you're having an operation, they put you to sleep. They give you some some painkillers. No, not painkillers. They give you a drug to make you fall asleep. So luckily Daddy slept through it, didn't feel a thing. And when he came out, he had a big plaster over his where his appendicitis had been, to cover up the hole, which had been stitched up with stitches. And the doctor said, "Now, you'll be just fine. You can come back to the hospital in 1 week and we'll take the stitches out." And then the Daddy was fine and he could drive his little boy home. But when he got home, he looked at his car and said, "Oh my goodness, look what you've done to it." It had got bumps all over it. There were bumps and scratches from where the little boy had been driving. And Daddy said, "You know what, I think you need to have driving lessons." So Daddy decided to get his little boy some driving lessons with a driving school. And obviously the driving school is very careful not to tell little boys how to drive a car. So he learned to drive. And after he learned to drive and was good enough, he was allowed to drive Daddy everywhere. He could drive Daddy to the shops, drive Daddy to his office, drive himself to the creche. Would you really like to drive, Aidan?
Yeah.
If you knew how to drive, would you drive me around?
No.
You wouldn't?
No. If I could drive, but if I could drive, I wouldn't drive because you drive me.
Right, okay. So that's kind of how it's going to be. Got it. Anyway, after that, lots of friends of Aidan from his school, which is going to school now, asked Aidan to drive them to various places, and Aidan became the official driver in the school. So anytime children wanted to go somewhere, Aidan would get in his car and drive them. So Daddy said, I think you're big enough to have your own car. And they went to the shop, Daddy and Aidan, to choose a car. And they had a look around, and there in the corner was a little red and yellow car with a bell on top. Just
it was all blue.
You'd like a blue car, would you?
Yeah.
It was a very small one.
I like blue one.
It was about the size of Noddy's car. Only 2 seats. And it had a little bell on top. And so Daddy bought the little Noddy-like car for Aidan. And Aidan could drive around whenever he wanted to go out somewhere interesting. He'd get in his car and drive off. And that's more or less the end of the story. Did you like that?
Uh-huh.
Would you like to have your own car?
Yes.
And if you had your own car, where would you drive it to?
I don't know.
What about the crush?
No. Nowhere.
Would you take your friends for a drive?
No.
No? Okay then. Let's go to sleep anyway now.
Daddy,
Yes?
let's the Toy Story.
Oh, we're done with stories now and I'm sleepy. I'm going to go to sleep too. Good night. It's no more stories time. It's after 8 o'clock. Shh. No more. Silence. I'll get Mummy to come and say good night to you, shall I? It'll be about 5 or 10 minutes because she's just doing the kitchen.